Well, thank you very much, and thank you to Kainos for hosting AICon today. You'll have heard from my biography as a CIO and technology executive. AI is something that I look at as another tool in the box when it comes to the objectives we have around digital transformation and citizen-centered services. So that's what I'm going to explore with our panel today in terms of the risks and the rewards from the perspective of the public sector executive. And I'm very happy to have with us today Gemma Hyde, who's the Deputy Director of Digital in the Crown Prosecution Service, Alex Fittis, who's the Head of Digital Operations in the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, and Colin Foley, the Deputy Director, Head of Consular Services Department, Consular Directorate in the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office.
It's quite an acronym.
So when we think about reimagining services and transformation, and we think about the obligations in the public sector and the big departments that you're all the grand poobahs in, tell us a little bit about what's happening today with AI and what you're seeing as some of the challenges. And I'll ask you first, Gemma, from the Crown Prosecution Service perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Crown Prosecution Service, so we sit at the centre of the criminal justice system. So that's interfacing with the 43 different police forces, doing all that prosecution work, and then kind of onto the court service as well. So big stakeholder complexity. I suppose one of the things that we've been doing around AI is exploring it and actively engaging in the conversation. It's something that, when we think about different digital innovation that's possible, we always have that question of where do we want to be? Do we want to be leading the game? Do we want to be following? Do we want to be sitting back and waiting? I don't think this is a space for us where we feel we want to lead it, but we do want to make sure we're really actively understanding it and looking at the different opportunities, risks, threats that it presents to us, because it's happening. It's happening all around us. Our police colleagues are looking at it as well. Same with the courts. So we need to understand what it might do for us. I suppose, yes, there's lots of risks and threats that we've been thinking about, but one of the things that I found really rewarding from the conversations is how much we've been able to engage our executive and across the organisation in AI. It's something that we did some user research with colleagues across the organisation at the end of last year, and everyone we spoke to had heard of generative AI. Yes, mainly ChatGPT, of course, but it was something that was really interesting to us, and about half of them had actually used it themselves, quite often in their personal life. But again, there was that interest and curiosity, and it's something that we've been able to really pick on to then build that conversation, particularly around the ethical angles.
Yeah, once you have that curiosity, there's risk and reward in that. Colin, from the perspective of Foreign and Commonwealth, how do you feel about that? What's happening?
Well, my part of the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office is the consular area, so we provide services to British people abroad who need assistance, usually if they're in some level of distress. And for us, we are the public-facing element of the Foreign Office, in essence. The people that people will see if they turn up at the embassy or the High Commission. For us, it's a modernisation of our services and trying to use our resources, limited resources, in the best way that we can. So we've done a lot about first contact, how people are engaging with us, and we've launched recently something on gov.uk that uses natural language. So people can sort of naturally say what they want from us, rather than having to read through a whole load of guidance. It then selects the correct guidance back for people. It's very simple, but it's been quite effective. And in the countries where we've trialled that, it's reduced our calls by up to 60%. So it's that triage and getting support in the first instance to folk is where our focus is at the moment. I think in terms of the challenge, actually I was going to say it's very similar to Gemma's, that ChatGPT can be an opportunity and a challenge, because you talk to people about AI and their mind goes to ChatGPT, and trying to say to people, it's not just that. There's lots of things, lots of lower hanging fruit that for our use case can not be that complex, not have all the risks around it, but actually can be quite useful. So sometimes it's just letting people know the range of things that could be there and actually starting simple rather than having to hit all the high risk things immediately.
So that risk equation is definitely important. Alex, big public facing organisation like DVSA.
Yeah. Afternoon, everybody. DVSA, which is not the people who do the car tax, just to remind everybody. So two things that I'm prominent involved with, which are relative to AI, is the UK theory test, which we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the sessions later on. An MOT service. And at MOT, we did successfully launch a risk rating system using machine learning. So, we've got it and we're using it really, really successfully. I think the challenge and the risk for me is, as AI is there, is do people know that it's actually in the business? And I'll give you an example of NLP in our customer service centre. If you ask the people in the customer, they're not using AI. We're using the new software that you bought. And unlike Colin, where people do ask for what they want, we get a lot of people who are asked to say what they want and say hello. The biggest word in NLP at the moment is hello or hi. So, I think the risk for us is just because you can use it doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to engage with it, are going to actually do what you expected it to do. I think the risk for me and some of our transformation things is just because we can use AI and we can start to use it in the biometric spaces for identity, it's fraught with danger. So the risk to us is we could switch off a load of really key stakeholders and we could create concern and worry in our customer base. So that for me is just because you can use AI, we've got to use it in a really well-structured way. And it's got to be visible. You've got to be honest with what you're going to do. So, I worry that just because you can doesn't mean you should. And, let's explore some of that through the conversation.
So let's dig into that a little bit. What are some of the ethical considerations, especially as we think cross-government? What sort of guidance do we have or do we need to put in place? And I'll address that to you first, Gemma.
Yeah, I think there's the ethical considerations in terms of public citizens. There's also ethical considerations in terms of what it means for our workforce. We have a duty of care over our teams as well. I won't profess to be an expert in AI ethics. I think a few people have talked about how that's a very popular thing to say. There's lots of brilliant experts that we work with to help us on that. But it's having that live debate. It's the area where our executive are really interested in as well. You can imagine as lawyers, they're quite discerning. They like to enter into a debate and think about those implications and having the space for that conversation. One of the use cases we've been looking at is Copilot and how can we use that. And that's provoked some conversations around what does it mean for our people as well. So how are they using the time? So they reported they were saving time. Some of that time they're investing in other high-value tasks. Great. That provoked could we get all of their time reinvested? That would look like a brilliant business case. And we actually took a step back and said, what does it look like in general, though, in our workforce at the moment? Our prosecutors have caseloads that are 3 times higher than they were going into the pandemic. There's a huge amount of pressure. Actually, we don't necessarily want them to reinvest all their time in high-value tasks. Maybe having that time, having that space. We talk a lot about great legal thinking. That takes time, as you can imagine, so having time for that, just having time for yourself as well. And then the different use cases that we're looking at, they span from those kind of more core organisational minute meetings, all those things, through to bespoke cases, looking at how we could use it to support victims, how we can support getting legal guidance. All of them have different ethical considerations, be it about where is it important that that's a unique kind of CPS skill that we don't want to de-skill ourselves, that we need to retain that. That's where a member of the public would expect a human in CPS to be doing that versus, they'd understand that was right to drive some efficiency. So really digging into that.
And CPS, you deal with victims, some of the most vulnerable people in society. The transparency and accountability that you need to build trust. Maybe if you could explain a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. We have several touch points during the journey where we're supporting victims. And we know that getting it right for them is important. As you say, this is someone who's gone through a horrific experience. Whatever they're a victim of, it's never going to be a good starting point. And so how can we support more of them? And thinking about how can we expand that. So is it being able to provide draft communications that then allows us to reach more victims? That's a possible instance, but how do we feel about that? And we have things like a victims reference group that we work with and we gauge on these topics to understand how it would actually feel from their perspective, as well as what we might think is a good idea from our perspective.
So I'm hearing lots of opportunities to really transform services. If we think about that broader opportunity to transform services across government, across departments, Alex, I'll maybe bring you in on that.
Yeah, in our organisation, we have interfaces with lots of bits of government, which is usually very transactional. I think the real opportunity is citizens transact with government. They don't expect to transact with, DVSA, DVLA, or other organisations. So I think where AI could really help us is, if you think about the one login and the one identity aspect, or the tell us once type of things, it must be really frustrating. And we do this currently in our organisation. If you want to get a driving licence, you tell one bit of government, DVLA, then you tell my service, do you want a theory test? And just to really make it a bad experience, you then tell the practical division of our organisation exactly the same again. So even in that simple bit within one customer journey, AI should be able to work out that you've got a licence and that you're ready for a theory test, and when you've taken it, AI can automatically do that. And I think that there are lots of transactions across government where AI could just make the citizens' experience much easier. It poses some real problems because, you're going to need common data sets, you're going to need to have data sharing agreements. But I think as AI comes in, the public will expect those transactions to work automatically. I heard this morning, that if you get in touch with a particular part of independent office, wait for 10 to 15 days for an answer. There seemed like an example that AI would really help. So I think, the citizen is an entity. They don't change, but what we expect them to do is adapt and change for every bit of government they deal with. Hopefully they don't choose to deal with you, Gemma, but sadly they do. But they may be on holiday and deal with you, Colin, and why can't we just say, I'm a citizen? Now, that probably relies on some sort of identity. So I think, it's here, it's going to happen, and we'll become more joined up, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to deliver an efficient public service. So it's here, it will happen.
So why aren't we doing that?
Ooh, this could be career defining, couldn't it? I think each bit of government, whether it's the devolved bits of government or where it's the different Whitehall departments, they all have different approaches to data. The way that you collect data, through your data briefings, you have to tell the citizens of why you're collecting and what you're doing with it. So if you've said you're collecting for the purpose of a driving licence, that's it. That is all you can do with it. So I think it needs a fresh think about, if you're telling government there. I'm not so sure if I gave my data to one bit of government, I'd want them to just willy-nilly share it around. I think, it's a real dilemma, so...
Yeah, we want you to share it when you're giving us something. We don't want you to share it when you're going to take something from us, probably, as a citizen. Colin, I'm going to ask you a little bit on the idea of privacy and security. And we talked about data sharing agreements being restrictive. How permissive is the legislation, and how do you think we get around what some of those supposed barriers are sometimes as they relate to privacy?
I actually don't think legislation is necessarily the barrier. There are definitely some things that would be improvable, but I think often it's just that we need to understand what it is we want to achieve with the data and be very transparent about that. So to your point about, why haven't we got the joint government that we would like? I think a lot of that is government is very big and it's very hard to string all of that together. I do think there's been a lot of progress made through the Government Digital Service and through everything that's now come into the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology. I think in the next spending round, there's going to be a lot of focus on promoting joined up government and trying to make that happen. I think AI is going to be an enabler around that in enabling data sharing that Alex was talking about, where previously that was just very challenging, to kind of very much in the too hard box. I do think though that the challenge is really not different, it's just more urgent. We do need to know why we're doing it. We do need to understand our data, and even after all these years, as Alex intimated as well, parts of government don't necessarily understand that. I think if we crashed everybody's data together at the moment, it would be a big old mess and would not achieve what we need to do. So there needs to be a real clarity around why we're doing it. That gives the transparency to the citizen, understanding our data. Those two together then allow us to understand, is the data suitable for AI? Is this kind of thing that you would trust? Is it something that's suitable, in your use case, for transactional services? Other services where you might need more empathy, where there's more sensitivity involved. For us, where we're dealing with people who have been bereaved abroad in serious circumstances, arbitrary detention for some folk, it's not necessarily, look, those are very human things. So you're thinking about how AI can help you. It's not necessarily going to do the full thing for us there, but it certainly might help us focus our resources, just as Gemma said, where they can make the best impact, you know. I think if we are clear about why we're doing it, if we're transparent, that's actually the key. And I would change it around sort of like legislation. I think actually the key to focusing on this is changing the culture around data in government. And that's not necessarily just about governance boards or at the top, but for all our workers on the ground who are doing things, they will be inputting data, gathering data for one purpose. They may not have the visibility that that data is then going to be used for different purposes, and that can lead to lots of operational workarounds that compromise the data integrity. That's actually going to be the big challenge. Talking to our staff, making sure they understand that their actions aren't just about the transaction or the assistance they're giving to a citizen at that point, but it can then have further upstream, downstream consequences of what they do. If we're able to do that and get people really working together on the ground and thinking about how they treat data better, that's going to be the thing that really drives improvement. It's probably more challenging than setting up a governance board, but I think government has a lot of governance boards. What we really need to do is work on how we work together.
Not more governance, but smart governance, maybe. I'll put it that way. So on that broader theme about governance and governance around data, if we know the use cases, the cross-government use cases that we want to promote, what else is getting in the way? Is there funding considerations that we need to think about in a broader way? Are we not able to deliver in an agile way in government yet? And I'll just open that up, whoever wants to jump in.
I'm going to give a really techie answer, not techie in an IT sense. My strong opinion as 20 odd years as a civil servant is that often the fundamental structure of government doesn't help joint of government. So the way budgets are allocated does not help. And as someone who's tried to do a lot of collaboration across government, it's always the budget that you struggle on, and that is not easy. And often it's the work of people on the ground to actually bring people together to make collaboration happen, rather than the structures of government. I do think there's a Whitehall answer to this almost that's probably beyond our pay grades. I think that's probably where a lot of the change needs to happen. Sorry, that's a very inside Whitehall kind of answer, but I truly believe that's, if the new government wish to enable change, that's where they should be thinking about.
And I think that's probably one of the opportunities with the kind of the government missions, to see across whole kind of system thinking pieces. So if we think about, one of the Safer Streets missions is around improving confidence in the whole criminal justice system. Well, actually, that's quite a clear mandate for us. And I suppose where I feel that AI almost gives us another bite at the opportunity, it's kind of the curiosity, the creativity to maybe have some of those cross-departmental conversations that, yes, we've tried before, but this is a new reason to do it. Doesn't always mean that AI will be the answer to the problem, but if we can spend time kind of falling in love with that problem, deeply understanding it, and what do our users, be they citizens or our people, need, that's an opportunity. But it is the making sure we don't layer too much governance on that. We need governance that helps us do the right thing, not governance to stop us doing the wrong thing. And that's a really important thing that I think we'll all have an active role to play in as we go forward to steer it towards that.
I think you said, could we do it in an agile way? Well, I think, yes, government's got a good track record of working in an agile way. I think the biggest challenge is, can we adopt AI across the whole of the public sector? Yeah, we probably can, and probably at some point the missions and the cross-Whitehall working will happen. I think the biggest challenge for all of us is, what are we applying AI to? It is underpinned by good data, a good thing. So, great, this is a conference about AI, but there should be another conference about the data that we've got, because if the data's not right and you're trying to apply AI to something where the data's not as good as you thought it was, you'll get the wrong answer or you'll get the wrong experience. So I think, there are two tracks here. One is the AI and how we use it really intelligently, but I think more importantly, it's the data, how that data's structured, how it's kept. And we have a responsibility to only keep data for lawful purposes and for as long as we genuinely need it. So that's going to be a real challenge. You might assume it's there, but you've deleted it because your data privacy said you get rid of it after 6 months. So I think data engineering and data structure is going to be key to making AI a success across government.
I think I'd add to that and say, also, it's the social context in which that data was collected. So to get that transparency, if people give you data for one reason, they will think they've given it for that reason, just as you said at the start, Alex. If we start mushing that together, we need to be really clear with people about what we're doing with it. That's how you engender trust. It doesn't necessarily mean consent is a challenging word sometimes in the public sector, because if you're working in criminal justice or you're working in the home area, for example, or if you're dealing with a disaster or a crisis, as we do in my department, like, you have to make decisions sometimes that are not without consent. But transparency in those uses is really key. And I think once we have that cross-government transparency and we're working together, that will help build trust to bring people with us.
No, and it's great to hear all of those varied opinions expressed in a very similar way. So before we wrap up, I'm going to ask you, if you had a magic wand and you could wave it today in the Crime Prosecution Service or in DVSA or in Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, what would be the one AI initiative that would be underway?
I'm probably going to slightly nick Alex's in some ways, but it is actually not about the AI. It's having the data there and that cross-government understanding and the willingness to be able to share it. Someone in the audience here, I'm talking about data and sharing data with very actively from passports. The ability to do that in a clean way with data we can trust, that we have done the hard yards to understand that it's there. If that were there, then actually I can choose to use AI or not choose AI, but that's the fundamental underpinning. That gets us to where we need to go.
Certainly we need the data first. I suppose if I had a magic wand and I could really have confidence that the AI tool would do everything we wanted to, no hallucinations, no challenges with it, I suppose some of the areas that I'd be really interested in is how can we use it to identify if there's disproportionality being introduced, or if there's kind of victim blaming language being introduced, either by a person or by an AI model itself. So actually, how can we counteract and use it for good? I think if you could have that straight away off the bat, and then that would unlock your confidence in lots of other AI tools.
And I will try to wave a magic wand, but the magic will happen in many years, is around identity and the biometrics. You know, we deliver 2 million driving tests, 3.7 million theory tests. And out of those numbers, some of the people who come to take that test is not the genuine person, there's impersonation. So, we know we've got tools with AI, and I know I could fix it, but if I could wave a magic wand, how can I get AI accepted in that identity transaction? And I'll wave the magic wand and let's wait for a couple of years.
Well, I think that takes us to time. We heard lots about risks, but lots of potential reward cross-government as well as within departments. So thank you very much, Colin, Gemma and Alex.
Thank you, everybody.